Hello, I'm Jim Cornell, and this is Base to Base, the weekly biotech podcast from Air Coastal Media. Yes, welcome again to the Base to Base Biotech podcast, and this episode is going out on April the 18th. It's been another relatively busy week with podcast interviews, although not as many because I'd planned on leaving the latter part of the week free for filming outside. But of course, 3 weeks of no rain is not allowed to coincide with the school Easter holiday, so it's now been raining for a week. But I guess that just leaves more time for work. And that brings us to this week's podcast. If you missed last week's, please do check it out over at deeptechdigest.com or via your favourite podcast app, because the two conversations we had with Bill Holodnak, founder of Occam Global, about hiring, and with Christian Schaffmeister about spiral ligamers were really interesting. And I'm definitely not boasting about the podcast. It's the guests and their knowledge and insights that make it special. This week we're talking with Vitalant's Kevin Land, Executive Medical Director, Biotherapies and VP of Clinical Services, and Becky Cap, SVP of Biotherapies, about blood. But it's okay, there's none to be seen, unless you get so engrossed in the podcast that you cut your finger while cooking. But first, we have a very interesting conversation with Brainomix CEO and co-founder Michalis Papadakis. The publicity around strokes and how to recognise them has definitely been a major positive factor in getting people to hospitals quickly after symptoms show. But getting to the hospital is one thing. Often patients are met by staff that aren't specialists in strokes, and as we've also learned, every minute counts. So when a company develops a system that helps get patients the help that they need quickly, it's literally a lifesaver. So let's find out about how Brainomix is making a difference for not only stroke victims, but also those with lung fibrosis. To start then, I wonder if you could give me a bit of background on your company and the journey so far.
Yeah, of course. So I am the CEO and one of the founders of Brainomix, and we started as a spin-out from the University of Oxford. At that time, I was the scientific director of the preclinical stroke lab in Oxford, doing research in stroke. And back then, as an academic and now leading the company, I was always driven by the unmet need. And in stroke, which was my subject matter back then, we knew that every hour a patient remains untreated. This ages the brain after someone has a stroke by 3.6 years. And although we have life-saving treatments, we have up to 80% of patients that should be treated are missing out. And that was my drive. Together with a professor of stroke medicine in Oxford, we founded Brainomix with the aim of ensuring that patients are not missing out for life-saving treatments, for conditions like stroke, and now we are working on lung conditions, where the connecting thread is imaging, defining how patients are diagnosed and treated. And the way we are creating this value is by using artificial intelligence, using AI to analyze scans of patients, head CT scans, chest CT scans, and enabling frontline clinicians to make more confident, timely, and ultimately better treatment decisions. And everything we have been developing is designed to increase the uptake of existing treatments in clinical practice. And we are also working with pharma companies to increase the success for clinical trials for new treatments. So that's the scope of the company, what we have been focusing, and what we have done since we started with Brainomix is, starting with stroke, we created a very solid foundation, and currently we are the market leading solution in stroke AI in Europe. And we have, very importantly, have a solution that is very well adopted and has been used in more than 2 million patient scans, driving patients that had a stroke their diagnosis and treatment decisions. And I would say, as importantly, we are very heavily evidence-based. And therefore, we have demonstrated in what's probably the largest scale evaluation of a stroke AI solution, where we did an evaluation here in the NHS, and that was more than 3 years. We included more than 400,000 patients in our evaluation and showed that we are increasing by more than 50% the number of patients getting selected for mechanical thrombectomy, which is a very powerful treatment, not just in stroke, it's one of the most powerful treatments we have in medicine. And ultimately, going back to the evidence base, we have shown that we are trebling the number of patients having full recovery after having a stroke, so impacting and improving the outcomes of those patients. And now we are in the process of replicating the learnings and the successes in stroke into another condition in lung fibrosis, where again patients have a devastating condition with a life expectancy of 3 to 5 years, which is worse than most cancers. And despite that short lifespan, it can take up to 2 years until they're diagnosed. And using, again, AI and analyzing, in this case, chest CT scans, we are identifying the extent of fibrosis, of scarring in the lungs, faster than it's currently done, to enable these patients to be diagnosed faster and get access to the antifibrotic treatments we have available that slow down the progression of the scarring of the fibrosis.
Could you maybe explain how your technology works?
Absolutely. The way the technology works and the way the technology is designed goes back to the patient and the patient pathway. And strokes happen in the community. Patients are first admitted in what we call spoke centers. These are primary stroke units where the patient will have a head CT scan, and the interpretation of the scan by the frontline clinician will determine whether the patient is diagnosed with a stroke and whether the patient should be transferred to a comprehensive stroke unit to receive the treatment I mentioned before, mechanical thrombectomy, because that's a specialized treatment that is offered in specialized centers. However, the interpretation of the scan, especially in the first hours after someone has a stroke, which is the time window we can intervene, is very difficult to interpret, even for experts. But especially in these primary stroke units, the frontline physicians are not stroke experts. And that's why patients are either delayed treatment or are missing out completely. And that's exactly where our technology helps, because we have a solution that is integrated within this patient pathway. So once the patient has a stroke, they go to the primary stroke unit, they will have anyway a head CT scan, and then our system automatically will take these images, will process them in real time, and automatically we send the results back to the physicians. They can even receive them on the smartphone through a mobile app, even if they're outside the hospital. And it can identify on these head CT scans if there are any signs of stroke. So our algorithms automatically, visually show to the physician how big is the stroke, which vessel is blocked causing the stroke. And importantly, we can measure if there is what we call tissue at risk, which is brain that has been compromised by the stroke. But if we treat the patient, we can salvage the brain tissue. And in addition to that, because we install across the hospital network, both in the primary centers and the comprehensive centers, we are connecting them. So once there is a patient that is diagnosed in the primary center, through our own platform, we send notifications to the physicians in the comprehensive center to get notified that there is a patient that should be transferred to receive mechanical thrombectomy, and that's how the team in the comprehensive center is prepared, and we save time.
I assume that this is all more efficient than doing it with humans. I mean, can AI pick up on things that humans can't pick up on?
Correct. So there are two things here. That first of all, before AI and what we developed existed, patients were managed by physicians looking manually at scans, which has big limitations because firstly, these scans are difficult to interpret even for experts, and therefore many times, as you said, things were missed. So many patients were not diagnosed or were delayed diagnosis. And importantly, there is a lot of variability when physicians look at a scan. You can give the same scan even to two experts, they will come with a different interpretation. So having AI not only picks up things that otherwise could not have been seen, it also standardizes the way physicians interpret scans. And that's the important point, that our technologies are not designed or aimed to replace the physician. They are used as a decision support tool to help to augment and elevate the interpretation even of a non-expert and expert.
Now that it's improved, are there still improvements that can be made, or are there still challenges associated with this?
So we are continuously improving our algorithms. We have shown that as a standalone, it performs as good as an expert. But as I said, the utility of it is not as a standalone, is how a physician would look at the results to make their own better and more informed decisions. And by improving the performance of the underlying algorithms, we help the physicians even more. At the same time, we add new functionalities. So we are able to identify, for example, large vessel occlusions, which is a major stroke, in the type of scans that are universally accessible and accessible in these primary stroke units. We are adding functionalities where we can measure more on a personalized manner which areas are affected, the kind of eloquence that specific brain regions have that are more functionally important, and therefore providing a complete tool set and a wide spectrum of functionalities in our technology that help the physicians with looking at the scans, the interpretation of the scans, but even beyond that, how our platform is used to enable the communication between teams, helping ultimately with the patient pathway overall.
You mentioned the fact that you're moving into lung conditions. Is that an adaptation of the same technology, or is that a new technique?
It's a bit of both. So there is a lot of learnings from what we did in stroke that we are transferring into our lung fibrosis product and technology. And what we realized when we moved away from stroke, outside of stroke rather than away, is that the work we did in stroke is ultimately enabling us to establish what we call a clinical adoption platform, where we generated the knowledge of getting the images, the data, developing the AI models, validating them, getting regulatory clearance. All these technologies are software as a medical device. And then more importantly, knowing what it takes to create clinical adoption. And these are the principles we are transferring into lung fibrosis, but at the same time, there are differences. And in particular, although both technologically and operationally, we are leveraging a lot of our knowledge from what we did in stroke into lung fibrosis, we appreciate that it's a different condition, it's a different organ, and it's a different profile of a disease. This is a non-acute disease, which has different dependencies and requirements when it's deployed clinically. It is on a condition that we needed to build the domain knowledge. So we brought experts, as we had in stroke, in lung fibrosis. So for example, one of our medical directors is practicing physician at the Royal Brompton in London. The same thing for one of our neuroradiologist experts are again frontline neuroradiologists at the Royal Brompton, a world leading center in the space. So we always trying to combine the clinical expertise with our technical AI know-how and ultimately our commercial ability and clinical ability to deploy these solutions at scale.
And I guess you received funding recently. Could you maybe explain a bit about that and what it's going to be used for?
Of course. So we were very pleased and proud to announce a few weeks ago successfully closing our Series C round, and we raised approximately $18 million in order to take what we've done to the next level. So currently, as I mentioned, we are the market leading solution in stroke AI in Europe. We have globally more than 300 installations using our stroke solution on a routine basis. And with this capital raise, we are expecting to deliver on different strategic initiatives. We want now, and we are taking now this next generation of stroke AI into the US, and growing into the US is a key area of both investment and growth expectation. At the same time, we want to grow our stroke AI adoption globally, and that's another strategic area of focus. And of course, we want to bring the lung fibrosis solution into clinical use at scale. To this front, one of our investors is the venture fund of Boehringer Ingelheim, the German pharma that has the only patented treatment, antifibrotic treatment for this condition. And we are working with them in the US to demonstrate how our e-lung solution in this space can help identify patients that have this condition earlier. And ultimately, through this capital raise, we want to start establishing a very big footprint in the US and globally. And then we are working with pharma companies and device companies, embedding all these tools into clinical trials. We do expect that the company will leverage what we built so far in stroke, deliver, as I mentioned, our solution at scale in lung fibrosis, and start capitalizing on these strategic partnerships with pharma companies.
This seems to be like something that every hospital in the world should have because it's hugely helpful. What prevents that from being the case? I mean, why is it not in every hospital?
But thankfully, we are in the stage where not even hospitals, but healthcare systems are realizing the value of what we've done in stroke and are adopting it at scale. So when we started, to your point, we were going from hospital to hospital, and there were barriers, especially in the early stages, to demonstrate the value, convert the skeptics into believers to see the value. But now that we have the evidence, the clinical impact, adoption is about having the healthcare systems, which is what we are experiencing now, going out to procurement to adopt solutions at scale, at an enterprise level. And we see adoption, for example, in England, we have the majority of the stroke units in the NHS using our solution. In Wales, we won a national tender and we are deployed across all stroke units in the country. The same thing in Hungary, where there was again a national competition that we won, and we are live across all stroke units across Hungary. And we are trying to replicate this either at the national or even at the regional level across Europe. And now in the process of going into the US, where there is a lot of appreciation about stroke AI, we have the American Heart Association in their guidelines expecting all stroke units to use a solution like ours. So again, the principle of the value is quite well established. It's about finding the right way to deploy it at scale. And I would say for us and for any company in the space, translating this into a business model that can grow sustainably.
And I guess in the US, the insurance system, surely it would save them both time and money in the long run to be able to diagnose more accurately and quickly.
Correct. In the US, especially where adoption of such technologies are driven by the business case and the return on investment a stroke unit or a stroke network might make, there is a very strong case about the stroke AI solution, because ultimately, as you noted, we are improving patient outcomes, we are treating patients faster, which has long-term benefits for the patients, for the healthcare system, for the society. But even in the acute care, by driving more patients getting access to the treatments we have available, these treatments have very big ticket reimbursement for the hospitals, which means they can start generating a lot of the revenue and cost that they are investing in order to adopt such technologies.
And as AI evolves, is that affecting what you do or impacting what you do?
We are part of evolving AI itself. We are part of this process, part of this opportunity and this horizon. And the scope and the opportunity just becomes bigger, more powerful. So right now what we have is focus, which is very meaningful, on something very specific, looking at the images of stroke patients and helping as part of a continuum of decision making, how that can be improved. But as AI gets more enhanced, more developed, and more augmented, we are looking, for example, at foundation models that start combining different even types of information, going beyond imaging, looking at other biomarkers, blood biomarkers, clinical characteristics, radiologist reports, and combine them all together to provide even more powerful predictive analytics. So not just descriptively providing an analysis of what the AI is processing, but augmenting all the different types of data to provide something much more insightful and powerful.
Obviously, it makes a huge difference when it comes to patients because of that speed. Do you have any cases or studies to show exactly what it's meaning for end patients?
Ultimately, the most important metric is the outcomes. And we have shown that we are trebling from 16 to 48%, so to almost 1 in 2, the number of patients that have full recovery after having a stroke. How this is derived is a driver of getting more patients treated. As I mentioned, we have shown that we are increasing by more than 50% the patients getting access to either clot busting thrombolytic treatment, the drug we have for strokes, or to mechanical thrombectomy, where we mechanically open up the artery causing the stroke, that is blocked, causing the stroke. And ultimately, we are helping patients getting treated faster. We have shown that we are saving around 50 minutes in decision making, where in stroke, time is brain. And therefore, every second, every minute we save, this is translated to better patient outcomes.
That kind of must go hand in hand with national and international campaigns to recognize the symptoms of stroke and to get people to hospitals faster so that you can make even more of a difference.
You're absolutely right. And ultimately, we can only help patients if they first go to the hospitals. So thankfully, here in the UK and internationally, there are very big campaigns at the national level trying to generate awareness for patients on what are the symptoms of stroke, if you are in doubt, and if you have any of the key symptoms of stroke, to immediately call an ambulance. There is a time window we can intervene. It is up to 24 hours. But again, as I mentioned before, the earlier we intervene, the better. So the best way that the patient benefits the most is a combination of a campaign that creates awareness and alert for the patients to promptly notify an ambulance going to an emergency unit, and then this hospital using routinely our technology to identify and diagnose the patient as quickly as possible, giving them access to treatments again as fast and as early as possible.
A great overview of how technology can make a huge difference to patients. Given the number of strokes globally on an annual basis, let's hope that every hospital everywhere gets access to the life-saving services Brainomix provides. Speaking of life-saving services and hospitals, Vitalant is a US non-profit organization, and it collects blood from volunteer donors and provides blood products and services across the US. It also does a lot more. Its operations also include biotherapy, lab and clinical services, research, information technology, supply chains, marketing and sales. So to tell us more, we had a conversation with Vitalant's Kevin Land, Executive Medical Director, Biotherapies and VP of Clinical Services, and Becky Cap, SVP of Biotherapies. First, could you maybe give me a bit of background on the company?
Sure. I have been with Vitalant for about 15 months now, and Dr. Land has a much deeper history with it, but I'll highlight the things that I find really exciting about Vitalant. We're a nationwide community blood bank in our origin, and that came about because a number of regional blood banks merged into this one organization that gives us not just a large footprint across 28 states, but deep infrastructure in some of these communities. And that translates into a distinct advantage and value proposition in the biotherapy space that we'll touch on a little bit later.
The blood centers across North America really came about at the end of World War II, sort of during and at the end. And there's an organization called AABB, used to be called American Association of Blood Banks, right? That sort of said, hey, all the blood that the military is using on the front line, we could use that to save our patients back home. And when those surgeons came back, they said, hey, we want that life-saving stuff, right? So the blood centers, the 10 blood centers that came together, most of them were founding members. So we have over 80 years of experience. Blood used to be collected inside the hospital mostly, but then the hospital said, you know what? We're primarily about patients, not about collecting, manufacturing, GMP, all of that stuff. And so they worked together with the local county medical societies, or all the hospitals got together and sort of helped found blood centers in each area. Why do I give you that backstory? Well, not only do we have 80 years of that, but the 10 blood centers specifically, to what Becky was saying, have very specific clinical touches, pretty significant deep clinical touches in those communities as well. So it was a cultural alignment. You know, we weren't just providing blood, but we also were providing HLA typing, coagulation and hemostasis, therapeutic apheresis, these sort of ancillary niche services that not every hospital can provide. Obviously, the biggest do, but there's 6,000 hospitals in the US. And I don't know the number, but if you just listen to the scale, not the number, I know 6,000 is right, but maybe there's 100, 150 that have HLA services embedded. So then that means if they want to have kidney transplants or whatever, they have to use somebody, another lab. And so we specialized in working with the community to say, hey, instead of having one hospital with HLA, how about if we serve as the HLA as a nonprofit, and then everybody in the greater geography can use us? We're agnostic. We're not seen as a threat because we don't take the patients away. We actually let the hospital keep the patient longer. So I think when we all got together and saw the economy kind of getting tough, it's like, well, it kind of makes sense. We're doing the same thing. Let's get together and see how we can make that as a national strategic mission.
Beyond that evolution, what kind of services do you now provide?
So it really is building on that theme of providing infrastructure and services that allow the hospitals to focus on patient care. In the biotherapy space, cell and gene space, we as a healthcare system are reaching about 20%, on a good day, 20% of the eligible population with these therapies. And a lot of that has to do with that infrastructure and those support functions. So where Vitalant has been invited in to the hospitals, we're providing apheresis support for patients. We're doing the collections of that starting material for product development. Because we support the bone marrow transplant program already with cell sorting, cell selection, cryopreservation, storage, we can do the same thing in the CAR T space. And then in some cases, we're even doing the distribution. We're taking the final manufactured product, storing it until it's ready for infusion, thawing it, presenting it to the bedside. So really that first mile and last mile of CAR T and other related therapies, it's what we can do in those communities. We serve about 900 hospitals of that 6,000 that Dr. Land mentioned. And we're looking at how we can expand those clinical services for the Biotherapies programs across that footprint.
Could you tell me about some of the research in the field and the results that you've obtained from that?
It's a good question. Again, leveraging the past, we've been blessed to have a very robust research group called Vitalant Research Institute, or the Innovation Center, the VIC, the Vitalant Innovation Center. And they themselves come from a storied background, mainly in infectious disease testing and looking at the safety of the blood supply, either through donor eligibility, risk for HIV, for example, or Chagas, or West Nile virus, or COVID. I mean, even during COVID, we were doing lots of testing behind the scenes. So because we have a national reach and we have very strong partners with the Red Cross and other folks, the FDA and other international policymakers often rely on the test results, that the studies that our research team does, to help inform national policy. So you may have heard most of the Western countries have moved away from an indefinite deferral for HIV to individual donor risk, where based on certain attributes, you can have, a very small deferral or a lengthier deferral. So that means it's a more equitable, a more inclusive way of approaching donors, instead of using a very big hammer saying, I heard this magical word, you're deferred forever. And that came through a lot of the work, or at least to change the United States policy, through efforts of VRI. And we have an ongoing part of that change was that we would be part of a surveillance group called TTIMS, where we work again with the CDC and others to survey a significant portion of the United States blood supply, just to look for ongoing risk. So while that's not exactly biotherapies, there's a lot of informatics involved there. There's a lot of AI. One of the studies is doing a lot of donor characterizations and patient characterizations, where we've actually worked with some hospitals where we provide blood to the hospital, and the hospital's providing outcomes data and patient and donor samples. And the Vitalant Research Institute is beginning to look at, hey, are there some characteristics here that say this is a really good donor or not a good donor for red cells or platelets? And why did this patient do better or not as well? So we can improve outcomes. What we've done, though, is we're beginning to abstract that approach to logic and to critical thinking and looking on the donor side and saying, okay, what characteristics of donors make them good candidates for advanced cell and gene therapy cellular starting material? Are there some characteristics that make their T cells better or worse, or B cells or NK cells? And so we're really fortunate. PhD that recently left Charles River, Brianna Schoen, has really been working on this topic for quite some time, and she's reaching out to the entire industry. I mean, she already is well connected, but trying to come together with what would be the best way to characterize our donors moving forward, not only from a will they come back, right? Because if they're a good donor, you want them to come back more than once. So incentives for that. But do the cells expand well? Do they take up the CAR or the virus or the CRISPR, whatever the technology is? Are there some that do better at that? Are there some that exhaust too soon and so won't have a very long lifespan in the patient? So she's working with the industry to come up with a solution for that. And then we're already talking to some of the AI giants on how we can start leveraging that and then begin to say, okay, this is our piece of the data. Here's your piece of the data. How can we put this together kind of like a peanut butter cup, Reese's peanut butter cup with peanut butter and chocolate? How can we put that together to come up with something brand new? And there's a way in AI to do a sandbox where we put our proprietary data in and you can put your proprietary data in. I can't see your raw data. You can't see my raw data. So there's some IP protection there, but we can both benefit from the outputs of that. So we're really exploring that as a way to collaborate with the industry to try to pull some of it out of a pure IP world where it's hidden in the walls that doesn't get published so others don't see the data and see how ways to improve patient outcome.
The comment I wanted to make is we have this history and we're building on that history. We've done some amazing things in the blood space using this research platform, this vein-to-vein model. And it's one of those things I'm blessed with less detail. And so the framework, when I first saw it, was just like, we have to be able to take this template and overlay it on cell and gene therapy and figure out how to make that work. Dr. Land mentioned Dr. Brianna Schoen, who's on our Biotherapies team, but we have an international world-class team of epidemiologists who work in this space at VRI. And so Dr. Schoen brings perspective on cellular starting material and characterization. They have that overview of the epidemiology and that kind of vein-to-vein model. So it's a lot of pieces coming together. So finding the right partners, finding the funding, making that happen is something it's a big, daunting task, but we're really excited about where Vitalant can play in that space and helping answer some questions that have been nagging both on the autologous side of therapy, which patient is best suited for which therapeutic modality, and on the allogeneic side, which donor characteristics truly matter in an allogeneic product, and how can you work around that, either to develop a couple of different options within a therapeutic class or have some selection criteria that help guide that.
We've submitted one grant already working with that group. One of the PIs there, name is Philip Norris. And although he's an epidemiologist and all the stuff that we described, he's been doing a lot of the immunology and cell work and is fairly well known in this space. He's done stuff on cryopreservation outcomes and stem cell characterization. So we're kind of hoping that we can to then start looking at bench to bedside solutions to get that technology out of the academic world and into patients is really exciting, I think, for all of us.
Are there any challenges that you face in some of the research or in getting to partner, or is there any, I guess, competition involved?
I'm worried less about competition in the space because the number of questions and the size of the challenges are so big. It's going to take a lot of us to work on these challenges and figure out what the answers are, and even whether it's truly finding the answers or finding the pattern for approaching a question to get to a good answer for the next, for a series of questions that come up. So I think it's about getting ready. We have so many challenges, like I said, so many challenges ahead of us. We've got to get the healthcare infrastructure addressed so that we can start getting more therapy to patients for those things that are already approved, and then figure out where in that cycle we can push on the types of creative collaborations that it would take, and getting potential collaborators to the table and comfortable with any concerns about their data and proprietary IP so that we can answer these larger questions. I love Dr. Land's example of the sandbox where you can, I don't have visibility to your data, you don't have visibility to mine, but we can generate together insights that really feed the overall system and base of scientific knowledge.
Yeah, that's really the solution that we're trying to work on, right, is patient access. The barriers, I could say, with research largely are funding, especially in the current climate where there's being a hard look at every dollar being spent. It's a little tough right now. We all go through those. So we have to find solutions. And then I think what's been very nice is, especially as we brought on talent, so it's not just a small handful of us talking loudly. We actually have people known in the industry, whether it's, Amy Hines, who is well known in the apheresis nursing world, or Brianna with the cell characterization. People say, oh, okay, you guys are serious. The reason why Becky's joined us is the board realized a few years ago that if Vitalant was going to shift meaningfully into this, that we could not just do the organic growth that we were doing. We had to do a transformational sort of leapfrog, which ultimately led to Becky coming on board and dedicated monies for a very significant 3-5 year strategic plan. So I think that was a hurdle that we've overcome. And now I think the problem is more people are saying, you're not farther along than we hoped you are, because they've been wanting a partner like this that could bring all of the resources of a large blood center together. Other blood centers have done similar things with allogeneic donors. There's only one other blood center, the Red Cross, that even comes close to our footprint. And no one else, to my knowledge, has the robustness of this first to last mile support. So it's a unique solution. And one of the trademarks that we tell folks is we meet you where you are. We don't come in and say, we're from the government, we're here to help. What we say is, we're in the service business, and where do you need help? Where do your resources end? And we're beginning to collect a bunch of really nice case studies from a dozen and a half small and very large, well-known institutions that have partnered along with us and saying, hey, we need you to help us either on a large scale or a very targeted scale just to help us here. Case in point, without naming names, we have a relationship with a hospital system, very well known, nurses and lab stuff. They do everything that we do. Like, why would you need our help? Well, a significant amount of their population is 4, 5, 6 hours away from the main institution. And the hospital is thinking, well, the nurses don't want to be a mobile provider. They don't want to drive that far. And the hospital's like, well, it doesn't meet with our mission to build a mobile nursing unit, to go out and do the collections and stuff. So that seemed like a very nice fit, since we already had staffing there. Can we just pick up those? Because not every patient wants to travel, especially think about it, of a pediatric. If you're a parent of a child, are you going to give up your whole day of work to take your kid and pull your kid out of school? I mean, there's a lot of logistics just to get a family member there. Even if you as an adult are having treatment of some kind, you need somebody else to drive you. And typically there's more than one. So it really ties up a lot of resources. So increasingly, the large hospital systems are seeing, if we can meet the patient where they are in their community nearby, then they're a lot more open to have access to that treatment. Because if they can't get to the otherwise large academic institution for that collection or treatment, they don't qualify for the advanced therapy. So I know I've talked around a lot of different barriers, but in the industry as a large, there's financial barriers, but there's just access and the logistical timing of getting these different treatments. And so we're trying to be the catalyst to try to decrease the barrier to entry into these therapies.
Yeah, because it's expensive infrastructure if you're a single hospital setting it up from scratch. We have 80% of it already in place. So you put another 20% into those resources, and from a central point in a community, we can serve as a hospital's primary resource, and they don't build anything, or as with some of our larger partners, They have everything in place, but they don't have flex capacity. So if they have more patients come in than they can handle, we get involved, support them with those services, and the physicians are able to treat. But it's not taking away from what they have. It's just avoiding infrastructure adds.
You were mentioning the plan, and obviously in this kind of area, there are so many different facets to it. How are you focusing, or how are you figuring out what that direction is rather than having your finger in 50 different pies, I guess?
Well, we have our finger in 5 pies. We are trying to follow our customers, and that's, Dr. Land said, we are where you need us. In the 28 states that we have, we're looking at where do we have centralized areas of activity, hubs of activity, and existing infrastructure that we can build on so we can deliver on that value proposition. So that's our starting point, looking at where can we leverage those things that already exist. The second tier is looking at hospitals that we know people from those hospitals through industry connections. What are their pain points right now? Where are they experiencing challenges? And are there ways that we can support them? Hospital nurses typically don't want to be mobile, but we have a base of nurses that is their job, to be mobile apheresis nurses. They have the licensure that's appropriate that allows them to travel across state lines, travel within a state, go into a hospital, go into a fixed facility that we have in the area, and help support patient care that way. So that's level 1 and level 2 of our strategy for supporting and growing in this space. Level 3, there's a sketch of it in the background, but level 1 and 2 are going to keep us busy for a minute. The pieces of that are worth mentioning right now, it's not about geographic growth. It's about, well, what other services would we add? And with the focus on decentralized manufacturing, and the MHRA's release of their guidelines supporting that just recently, I think that might have been today or sometime this week, that's something that we see as potential. On the equipment side, you have manufacturing equipment that is closed and integrated in a system that doesn't require exposure of the product to the elements. It's a closed system, it's automated, it looks a lot like the equipment that you would use in blood manufacturing. One of the biggest cost drivers for manufacturing is clean room utilization. If you can take cell and gene therapy production that has a time-sensitive element or needs to be close to a patient that can be produced in a controlled, not classified space, and put that close to where the patients live, you have transformed what the system is able to do in terms of treatment. So that's kind of our phase 3. It's like the first 2 are about infrastructure and space, coming back on the third one to infrastructure and a different service model.
There's a lot of research in cell and gene therapy and a lot of work going into that area. How do you kind of stay ahead of that research and incorporate some of the things that happen within the field into what you do?
That's the $1 million, maybe $1 billion question, Jim. If you've been in the industry meetings the last few years, everyone's talking about future proofing, right? Their solution is uniquely future proof. The point that you're getting at is there's not a tried and true scalable solution right now. Centralized manufacturing is very high touch. There will be solutions, but it may take 20 or 30 new technologies that ultimately get us to where we optimally need to be. So I think how we've approached it is we've tried to adopt industry standards as much as possible. So like the Optia, and everyone uses the Optia, right? So it's kind of like PDF, portable document format. We've been using that as a format for over 3 decades. And while it has changed, it's still portable, right? If I send you a PDF, you can see it. And now you can even electronically sign it. So by sticking with industry standards and working with the industry to increase the standards, Brianna is on a group, ISCT group, that's talking about how do we standardize the terminology or the assays that we use to characterize cells, right? If we say the cell is good because it has these attributes, we should probably all use the same language instead of having Kevin's favorite way and Becky's favorite way and Jim's favorite way, right? So trying to stay in that, trying to be in the thought leadership, being on task force and things like that, so we can sort of stay ahead of the game and listen. Also having researchers so they can tell us this is what's interesting coming down, so our strategic plans don't ignore it. We've got to go to the industry and we got to read the basic literature to see where things are going, right? To solve that is pretty complex. And I'm sorry, ChatGPT isn't there yet. It can help you along the way, but there's a lot of confirmation bias built into ChatGPT, and what it knows, and what it doesn't. And of course, I'm just using ChatGPT as a marker for all of them. It's not just ChatGPT. It still takes a creative, critical mind, more than one, to think through that. But I would say right now, as we're onboarding our digital platform to digitize our biotherapy solution, and we are struggling, Jim, to make sure that we're not baking it so rigid that when something flexes to something else that we're unable. In fact, most of the solutions out there for biotherapies, it's kind of like that bridge near your house that they're building now, but was for 30 years ago population, and even now it's kind of meeting your needs. That's what the IT solutions feel like, that a lot of them that we're seeing is they were built for a single institution 15 years ago, and we're not a one-to-one relationship. We're a many-to-many relationship. At any part of the way, we could be part of the process from collection to bedside, thaw, dosing, and we don't infuse, but we hand that off. We could do anything along that spectrum. Sometimes we do all of it. Sometimes we touch it and then release it and bring it back and release it. Do you know how much complexity has to be built into a system to assume that anything can be handed off or brought in at the same time? We need a fairly generic way of saying the source material here, give you an example, is birth tissue, not placenta, not cord, not umbilical, not Wharton's jelly, like all the things it could be. I need something generic because I don't know what the magic cell is going to eventually be out of the placentas and the cord blood we get out of it. So let me make that a generic source, kind of like crude oil. You have crude oil, and look at the 100,000 things that we make out of crude oil today, from pharmaceutics to gasoline. Don't limit me. We have to have those kind of conversations with partners, and there are a few out there that are beginning to understand, but most of the programs out there are designed for one hospital that has one clinical apheresis group, one research group, and we're so dynamic that it's fun, but it's difficult to find a solution that doesn't box us in.
I think at the core of that is you have some first principle solutions that will feed many branches of activity. And we're focused on those core solutions and building those out so that rather than going down one path very aggressively and really solving that one therapeutic issue, we're looking at infrastructure support that can span a range of products and services and be nimble and supportive as the industry changes.
So what does the future of solving those problems look like for Vitalant? And where do you go from here, I guess?
Well, Vitalant's future in solving those problems is really about just getting closer and closer to our clients as partners on the pharmaceutical side and on the hospital side. Because my crystal ball is very cloudy. And so I want to be moving in as close relationship with those customers, those clients as possible to help serve patients' needs. And I was at a working group recently where we really dug into what is the patient need, extending that to what is the patient need, what is the family need, what is the community need. If you start from that patient and work your way out, and at the edges you have the hospitals and the pharmaceutical companies, that's where our community footprint and our relationship with donors and patients in those communities that infrastructure really makes a difference. And it's something that I know our entire team is really excited about delivering on.
Yeah, that reminds me, one of my all-time favorite mentors, Tom Puckett, said, since we're nonprofit, right, that whatever's right for the patient is ultimately the right strategy. So we just have to focus on that. Obviously, it's got to be fiscally responsible, right? Because you could do something for one person that puts you out of business, so you can't help anybody else. But if you wouldn't do it for your mom or your dad or your partner or your children, then it's probably not the right thing, right? If it's something that you would want to aggressively go after, then that's the right thing for the patient. Eventually, Becky is one of the world's best at finding relationships and partners with people that have a similar mission like that. So by coming together with a group of people, a network of networks, as we've sort of used that term this year, that have a similar mission and focus, it just harkens back to why the first 10 blood centers got together, because they saw that the patient was the ultimate need in the community that we serve, right? If they need this service, maybe we can lift it up. We're just extending that concept into the biotherapy space. And what's really cool, a couple years ago, it was just like, well, blood centers, if they even knew we existed, it was just as a source for allo donors. And our relationship was primarily with the hospitals that our blood center sisters interacted with. But Jim, now the relationship is beginning to flip. The pharma is coming to us and they're saying, oh my gosh, you guys are amazing. You know how you did that for this hospital and this hospital? Can you do that also for these other hospitals that aren't even in your blood network? We have some pretty amazing relationships being built with the big pharma folks as their stuff gets commercialized early on. No brainer. Dana-Farber, UPenn, Hopkins, MD Anderson, there's a whole bunch of names you could put in there, Dartmouth, things like that, where they would go directly to them and they would work with their group and have their lab and their nurses do the collection during the clinical trial. You don't want 6,000 hospitals doing it 6,000 different ways. So they too are understanding the hub and spoke model. In fact, our hub and spoke model that we've deployed is phase 1, which is New Jersey, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Denver, Phoenix. That's almost a straight line across the US. Large airports, access to large density locations and lower density locations. And they're coming to us and saying, hey, can you help us with collections here? Can you help us with processing here? So, you take the car collection, you do some initial testing, you might cryopreserve it, or you might just dose it out into different bags and send it along the way. We thought that it would take a couple of years for that really to be seen as a value. And almost as soon as we started saying, hey, let's do this, groups started coming out of the woodwork because we were solving a problem that, again, they're not designed to fix. They're designed to manufacture a product, not to deploy it across the US. So we were talking about it's almost like holding hands, right? We're grabbing the pharma company and the basic science and the policymakers on this side. And then on this side, we're grabbing the hospital systems and the physicians and ultimately the patients. We're in a position where we're able to close the gap. So, one group is going this way, the other group is sort of approaching it from the other direction. We're not the only ones, but I like to think that we're playing a pretty big role in helping to close the gap there.
Well, a major organisation with a major role in all things related to blood in the US, and it's interesting to find out more about what Vitalant does and how they're making a difference to patients across the US. And I didn't faint at the mention of blood. It's a good day. If you have questions or comments or suggestions for guests, please do get in touch, and you can do so at jim@deeptechdigest.com. So, until next week, wherever in the world you are, I hope you have a great week. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next week for another Base to Base Biotech podcast. The Base to Base Biotech podcast is an Air Coastal Media Limited production.